Hi, everybody, and welcome. I can see a few people are still joining us from the lobby, and I'll just hit action there. As you might have heard, this session is being recorded. Just so that you're aware, it will be then shared with all of our registered attendees tomorrow via an email, along with both Paul and my PowerPoint slides for you. So good afternoon. And welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Carolyn Wade. I'm the lead here at Educational Leadership Futures, or ELF, as we like to call it at Griffith University. For those of you who aren't familiar with ELF, we are a research collective supported by the Griffith Institute for Educational Research. We bring together researchers, academics, higher degree by research candidates, and also emerging scholars who are advancing the field of educational research, specifically in educational leadership. Our focus is how leadership can be reimagined to respond to the complex realities of contemporary education, whether that's in schools or in systems or in universities or even in communities. Today's webinar is the second in our Principal Wellbeing series. This is a series of presentations aimed at bringing current research on principals' health, safety and wellbeing directly to you, the people working in and alongside our school leaders. So just a couple of housekeeping before we begin. As I mentioned, this session is being recorded and we will share the recording with you tomorrow. You are welcome to have cameras off or cameras on, whatever is most comfortable for you. And you'll notice that the comments function has been turned off for this session. However, we do have the Q&A function and you are welcome to post questions either throughout the presentation or towards the end. And these will be discussed time permitting after the presentation. So I'd now like to acknowledge you to country. Here at Griffith University, and you can see the image of our clan groups on the screen there, Griffith University campuses are located. I'm joining you today from the Nathan campus, which is on the land of the Yuggera, Juggera and Turrbal peoples. Griffith University acknowledges the people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and learn. The land our campuses are on have long been a place of learning, and we benefit and take forward the responsibility from learning in and on this place. We pay respect to elders, past and present, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Thank you. So, welcome to our webinar today. Sustaining School Leadership, Practical Responses to 15 Years of Principal Wellbeing Research. This is the first time this research is being presented in Queensland, and we are so pleased to be the ones facilitating that conversation. The timeliness of this work is so important because what is being asked of our school leaders right now and the toll it is taking demands our attention. This session is a really important step in bringing that evidence directly to the people who are working in and alongside school leaders. And before I introduce our wonderful presenter, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the remarkable breadth of people we have registered for this session. And I did this for our first webinar series as well, but we had nearly 70 people registered to attend today. And I know there's a few people coming from a video conferencing room with Teams and a few late apologies. But this diversity in our audience tells us something really important about the reach and relevance of this work. We have school leaders from across Queensland. We have principal consultants and system leaders from Brisbane Catholic Education, the Department of Education, as well as Independent Schools Queensland. We have workplace health and safety teams. We have directors of principal health and wellbeing. We also have members of rehabilitation teams. And I can see we've also got a president of a National Association of State Schools. We have workplace psychology consultants and colleagues who are in dedicated roles supporting our school leaders every day. We also have a wonderful range of Masters of Education and Research students joining us today who are researching and learning and reading in this space, as well as academics from across Australian universities. I mentioned to Paul before we started, we have a really impressive South Australian contingent here with us today, and welcome. Every one of you brings a really great perspective that matters to this conversation, and we are so glad that you are here. So now I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful presenter. For 15 years, the Australian Principal Occupational Health, Safety and Wellbeing Survey has tracked the pressures facing school leaders across the country. The data paints a pretty consistent picture: unsustainable workloads, rising emotional demands, and burnout levels that continue to challenge the profession. But what do we actually do with 15 years of evidence? Our presenter today is Associate Professor Paul Kidson, who will be drawing on the longitudinal findings from this survey and moving us from beyond diagnosis towards a response. He'll discuss what the data reveals about the changing nature of school leadership, including trends, workloads, psychosocial safety, resilience, and emotional labour, but also unpack what these patterns mean for both those of us leading schools and those leading systems. We've got a deliberate focus on practical application for this session today, and thank you to those who gave us their feedback after the last session. So we're hoping to explore some strategies and approaches that schools and system leaders can adopt to support leadership sustainability and well-being within our own contexts. And with that, I'd like to hand over and introduce Associate Professor Paul Kidson. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carolyn, and can I thank you very much for the warm invitation and for the generosity of those of you that have given up at the end of a day, many of you in schools, many of you with fairly busy diaries and schedules, to be here to have a bit of a consideration of some of the things that you might know a little bit of, but we've deliberately designed this to go a little bit beyond some of what is the headline media sort of circus that happens every March or April when this data comes out. I want to applaud both Griffith Institute for Educational Research and the ELF priority that you've set forward, because building on the back of some complementary work that colleagues of mine in Monash, New South Wales, in Sydney, in Deakin have been doing, it does paint a broad picture. So the good news is that some of you who are aware of this and might see some of the, unfortunately, the media gets latched on to things like violence and all the excitable things like that. We're not going to be exploring that, you'll be pleased to know, because we are looking, as Carolyn said, not just at what the 15 years of the program looks like, but what that means and how we can respond both at an individual level and at a system level. The issues are so complex, what we might think of as wicked problems, that they don't have simplistic answers, and we want to eschew any notion that that might be the case. So let's just jump into it, and I want to give my own acknowledgement. On the left-hand side is the country where which is the land of the Dharawal people just south of Sydney, the land of the Camaragal where I was earlier in the day, which is where I do a lot of my work. And in the same way that Carolyn, you did with your own, I want to acknowledge that we are part of an ongoing knowledge creation and conversation between our First Nations, our contemporary peoples, as we forge, hopefully, a much more reconciled life together as a nation. So we're going to jump into this, and as I do, I want to begin by acknowledging the outstanding foresight and energy of Professor Emeritus Philip Riley, who established this project in 2011. Without his insights, we wouldn't be here this afternoon. But we are now at 15 years, and we deliberately looked in this year's report at what that longitudinal insights bring us. Over the last few years, we've been cutting our data different ways, career stages, different other sorts of lenses that we've placed over it. And this year we thought, well, let's look back at what we've seen over the 15 years. So here is some distribution differences. Last year we had, and I need to say, I think most people may be aware, the data is collected in 2025, but reported in 2026 when our report goes out. So if you get the two dates out of sync, the data's from 25 and it was reported in 2026. In 2011, when it was first collected, Philip Riley was then at Deakin University and had a very strong Victorian emphasis in terms of the participants, had a very strong government background as well. And you've seen now over the 15 years, it has settled down to a much more representative nature of the population that's involved with it. Now, with one exception. Where we've seen a big change are the number of participants choosing not to identify which sector they work in. And that actually gives us a little cause for concern to say, well, are they just concerned about what they would be saying? We do have a number of system leaders and political decision makers who are not always embracing of some of the work that we've provided. And we keep on saying to them, it is a large sample group. Out of 10,000 schools across the country, we've got 20% of them that are reporting that, but some of them still holding back. And we fear that that is because they just kind of don't want to put their head up above the parapet, as the saying might be. Now, we've got a number of elements, and I'm not going to go through all of them. The link is in the slides. You can get to the full report. But we asked for the source of 19, response to 19 sources of stress on a 0 to 10. 0 being not stressful at all, 10 being, I think I might pack it in and go and run a cafe. And then we do an average of each of those sources of stress, and then we rank them. In 2025, these were the top 6. Now, if we have a look at these top 6 spread out then over the 15 years, we get a very, very different picture. Those 6 sources of stress from 2025 looked very, very different in 2011. And you have a look at the compression that has taken place over that time. The spread has gone from 2.6 out of a scale of 10 down to 1.3. Now, this is an argument that we've been putting for the last few years, that what's occurred in the role of the principalship is not other things are taken off the table, but more gets put on the table. So there has been this compression of work with no commensurate change of understanding the nature of the work that's taken place. The other thing that we started to note, this was a few years back, was there's been some discussion around the role that COVID has played in the way that we respond to some of these issues. And again, we eschew that, because this trend actually started well before COVID arrived. You actually see in the data for 2020 that it dropped. And one of the reasons we think that that dropped was because when people went to remote versions of learning, and particularly, unfortunately, some of the stresses that we get from parents and caregivers who might be not necessarily as supportive, that declined a little bit when you went into this type of remote mode. Unfortunately, we've seen that bounce back. Now, for those of you who are a little bit more kind of socially broad in seeing some of these dates there, 2014 is also the year that Jonathan Haidt, in his text, The Anxious Generation, identified as a major shift in some of the issues related particularly to student mental health. And we see now that the issues related to supporting both mental health of students and increasingly the mental health of teachers just was not really on the radar 15 years ago. Now, I'm not arguing that Haidt's work is not without its own critique, but it's also one of those things to say something has gone on over the last 12 years that is not new. It's been a crescendoing experience, and that's something that we need to be really quite concerned about. Even if we take the grand mean, that is, putting all of those means individually, collectively together and seeing what the mean is, that pattern is unambiguous. It's one thing to be able to argue that life has always been difficult for principals. I spent 11 and a half years as a principal before I came into the academy, and I can tell you, yes, it was difficult. But this data is demonstrably saying there's something qualitatively and quantitatively different about the experience from 15 years ago, and that's the benefit of such research. Well, one of the other things that we include, one of the other instruments that we include is the Copenhagen Psychosocial Questionnaire. It's an array of measures, and we're not going to look at all of them for the sake of time. We're just going to look at some of the salient ones in understanding not just the response of, not just understanding where we are now, but what we can do in response to it. So the full data is available in the report. You can go and have a look at it. Now, here's just 2 to start with. The quantitative demands in the workplace, and the comparisons that we've included here are school leaders, all school leaders, against the general population. There is, and some of you might already be forming some question around this, are there any differences within that sort of global data? Yes, there are. There are some jurisdictions, state territory jurisdictions, where they are more or less pronounced, and there are some sectoral differences, a little bit beyond the scope of this afternoon again. But as a global group, you can see that there's a fundamentally different pattern against the general population. Copenhagen Psychosocial Questionnaire is a globally used instrument of many hundreds of thousands within its data set. So when we see the quantitative demands in the workplace, most principals and most senior leaders in schools know that you can have a cranky parent, a disgruntled staff member, a broken toilet, the photocopy is not working, and you haven't even had your 9 o'clock cup of coffee. So the enormity of the demands and the pace at which they take place are very significant. It's these ones that we are more concerned about. And I want to draw attention to your last presentation through here about the emotional labour work that is led by Jane Wilkinson and Fiona Longmuir, Christine Grice and their colleagues. Terrific work that they're doing through that project, that ARC project. The cognitive demands and the distinction, I do joke with some of my colleagues about the technical use of language such as huge, but anyway, that's what the team have decided it is. The difference there between the cognitive demands of what school leaders face in their work, the emotional demands, and look at the difference between the emotional demands there and the general population. And that's why the work on emotional labour through that ARC grant is so instructive and so insightful for understanding the experience for many, many school leaders across government schools in this country. But it's this last one that we are deeply concerned about because it sometimes goes under the radar a little bit. It is the demands for hiding emotions. School leaders, whether they like it or not, they are the emotional barometer of their community. And the community will look to them to see how ought I to be responding to these types of moments. In at least one instance, one of the schools where I was, we had 45 minutes to evacuate the school under threat of immediate bushfire coming towards the school. That's not the moment to have a large consultative process. That's not the moment to sit around and sing Kumbaya. That's the moment also not to be going, I've got no idea what's happening here. There's got to be some decisions made. Unfortunately, for many, many school leaders, they will suppress some of their own emotional states for the sake of being able to make the community function correctly. And that has an increasingly adverse impact on their health, particularly their mental, but also their physical health. If we have a look at the changes of this over time, similarly, there is an unambiguous trend across each of those measures. And what that says to us is that in 2011 and in 2025, whatever it is that we think is going on in schools, it's not the same thing. And that's the thrust of this whole presentation. It isn't the same, and we need to respond to why it's not the same in ways that are constructive for where we are now, not what we think we would like to be at in 2011. One of the other set of measures that we have, and this is a really positive measure, the work organisation job contents, the two critical ones that we see there are about the meaning of work and the commitment to the workplace. And this begins to introduce for us what we call the paradox of school leadership. Because whilst, and I've left aside all of the threats of violence and the physical violence and the abuse and all that sort of stuff that you might have seen through a lot of the media work that I do when this comes out, despite that and despite the challenges, our participants report that they find great meaning in their work. They've got an enormous commitment to the workplace, and this is somewhat at odds. How, you would think, under the circumstances described in previous data and complementary data, do they do that? It's because they've got this profound sense of arguably what you would say is the old language of vocation. This isn't purely just a job. This purely isn't just a career. It is something deeply personal, something deeply intense for many, many of them. And again, we see a very similar sort of pattern. The meaning to work has remained virtually unchanged in those 15 years. However, we are slightly concerned to see this softening of the commitment to the workplace. Over the last few years, one of the things we have been recommending, both in the media work that we talk about this and also to policymakers, is to say that that generosity, that commitment, that derived meaning can't be taken for granted. because if it is taken for granted, there is a massive risk. I haven't included the data in this report, but 2 years ago, we introduced an item around the intention to quit. And we did so because we saw in some of our qualitative comments an increasing number of people saying, look, I'm just worn out, I'm done, I think that's it. Now, we first saw that in 19 out of 2,500 is statistically not really that significant. And even when it went to 63, our team was sort of saying, well, it's still a very small percentage of a 2,500 person sample group. And we actually looked at it and we came to the conclusion it is important because firstly, we were never asking them to tell us that. And so 2 years ago, we introduced an item that said, I seriously consider leaving my current role. Not necessarily that I'm leaving education, but I just seriously consider leaving my current role. And unfortunately, 56% of the participants agreed or strongly agreed that they were thinking that. So when you combine that with this data, we look at a very demanding role. We look at a role that is continuing to change. And yet, paradoxically, we see that so many of them love what they do, but that tapering off is beginning to give us pause for concern. We then balance that up with this other more distressing data, which shows a slight uptake in the percentage of people starting to report depressive symptoms. Some years back, I'm in New South Wales, jurisdiction where I spent most of my career. Some years back, there was a public roads campaign, traffic safety campaign about how many people is it okay to have on the annual toll? And this person comes out and they go, oh, well, I don't know, like maybe 50. And then at the end, 50 of that person's family come out from behind the screen. And he says, yeah, maybe none. So the fact that we might have these proportions, maybe not as bad as some others, but how many is appropriate to have getting severe depression? None is the answer to that. Similarly, this gives us great pause for reflection, the increase in generalized anxiety. Between both of these and between the tapering off of the commitment to the work, we're beginning to raise even more concern that if we don't do some significant change to what we're doing, we run the risk, and the risk we would argue is now becoming heightened, that there are people who will just be responding by saying, I'm just not going to do this anymore. I don't think I can do it anymore. As I said, the other paradox to that is that our brief resilience scale, which we've only introduced a few years back, has, again, a pretty healthy profile, except the last 3 years. So it adds more to our concern. Are we starting to see in our data a softening of that commitment, a softening of the willingness and the generosity that the profession has? Most school leaders will do so much for everybody else and not necessarily look after themselves. And we're going to talk about some of that over the next 10 minutes or thereabouts. At the same time that we release our report, we've had the privilege of working with the conversation over the last 4 years to be able to put a companion piece to it. And in this year's piece that came out earlier this year, this is what we argued for. That 2011 was also the year that the AITSL standard for principals was released. And if that standard sets out what we're expected to know, understand, and do, then we're seriously not in the same game. It's such a fundamentally different role, and it's why we've been clarion in our call for the fact that the Australian Standard for Principals is now no longer a fit-for-purpose instrument. No, it doesn't have the same registration and accreditation requirements that the teaching standards do, but it is still held up as a measure of understanding what the work of principalship is, and our solemn argument is that it now no longer has relevance and currency and needs to be altered. Whether that's the case, and we've put this directly to AITSL, so there's no telling tales out of school here or anything like that. We've said very strongly that it needs to be a better reflection of the changed landscape like some of our data has represented. So these are some of our data recommendations. And we've then got some other suggestions that we're going to throw out, and it'd be great to have some conversation around maybe some great suggestions from those of you who are here. Now, again, we make many, many recommendations, and we've been much more acutely political and directed and targeted over the last 5 years, and we make no apology about that. These are just some of the salient ones that cover, when Caroline and I were talking about this, and we're looking at the solution to some of these issues are they're bilateral. They are both systemic and they are personal. And we'll finish up with some of the personal stuff. First year psychology talks to you about locus of control. There's some things that you can't control. Let's look at the things you can control, and we'll leave that aside. But there are some significant structural elements that also need to be considered. And of course, across 8 territories and states with 3 sectors and a Commonwealth, 25 education systems means it's jolly hard to get some commonality about it. Nonetheless, here are some of the top line ones that we've got. Implement workload reduction strategies. I'm pleased to see that there is evidence that that is beginning to happen, particularly amongst some government jurisdictions. In 2023, the Productivity Commission's damning report into Australian education reported that we've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars for not necessarily much change to that. And one of the statements that they included in there is a delicious phrase: low value administrative tasks, quote unquote. They beset not only teachers, but school leaders. I could tell you any number of anecdotes. One will suffice, of a very senior leader complaining that their system asked for the same data set 4 times on 4 different occasions from 4 different people within its system. Now, that type of time duplication, they said to me, it's only a 15-minute job, but if it's a 15-minute job that becomes a 1-hour job, because I've got to do this. The sting in the tail of this recommendation, I'd have to say, however, is that we are calling very strongly for the production of public reporting on the progress of these strategies. There's so many reports go, not only in education, but in our political discourse generally. Recommendations are made, things get put into boxes and shelves and then drawers and whatever. We want to see that there is these good strategies that are underway. The Better and Fairer Schools Agreement has got a number of constructive elements in it as well, but again, they will take some time to roll through. The public reporting is one of the areas that we would like to encourage jurisdictions to seriously consider. This is a really important one, offering reflective supervision. School leaders, because of those emotional demands and the demand for hiding their emotions, school leaders have every bit, in some regard, the same sort of emotional demand as first responders, as other types of very significant socially confronted professions, psychologists, counsellors, paramedics. Now, they get these types of things built into the fabric of their terms and conditions, and we're saying that it is time, it's beyond time, why this is not the case for school leaders. Structured mentoring, professional supervision, so that they can both debrief, and this is not, let me be unambiguous, this is not performance management. It is a separate process. If you've got an underperforming principal, I'm the first one to say that needs to be addressed for the sake of the students and the staff in that school. But this is a separate, this is a parallel sort of provision. This is a second one that some jurisdictions and some systems will already have something like this in place. Various other modes of leave, and in some sectors there are sabbatical leave, a provision that is different to long service leave. A long service leave is a chance to get away from everything entirely. Sabbatical leave is an opportunity to be refreshed professionally, to be able to look at things, go away, get some fresh perspective, or other personal and professional renewal strategies. Now, part of the feedback difficulty that we've identified is a number of system leaders saying to us, we make these types of provisions and they don't get taken up. And this is where there's a sub part of this recommendation, which is the community, and it is beyond what we're talking about this afternoon, but the community, and that's both teachers and parents and caregivers, need to provide permission for those leaders to access that leave. The guilt that those leaders will often feel is that they don't think they can do that because it'll look like I'm shirking or it'll look like I'm not working hard enough. That is a That is a construct that is just regressive. It's thoroughly unhelpful. And the net result of it is it has good people not caring for themselves. I am yet to see, despite as many planes as I've been on, I'm actually yet to see any of the oxygen drop down, thankfully. But I would be thoroughly surprised if any parent with a 3-year-old child would not put their mask on first before they put their own on. It's an inherent nature of the generosity that the profession has. And we've got to be able to provide the guilt-freeness of these for these principals to use these facilities to look after themselves. The last one, which is really quite compelling, is a one for systems. Build cultures of support across systems. Now, it is remarkable the number of times I've done some work with systems where I give a little bit of unsolicited advice that says, when anybody from your head office rings a school leader or someone from the school, the first question that's legitimate is, how are you going today? Sure, we can get to PISA. Sure, we can get to enrolment. Sure, we can get to absentees. Sure, we can get to any other policy issues that are there. But too many principals report the fact that they feel their system, and I'm talking cross-sectorally here, cross-sectorally, will feel that their system is there to check up on them, to hold them to some sort of scrutiny, and that is actually a unilateral type of relationship. It is not conducive to good education. It is not conducive to the ongoing longevity and welfare of the school leaders who turn up day in and day out and deliver on this. Invariably, school leaders are generous people. Yes, if you get one or two that'll go off the reservation, they need to be dealt with, absolutely. But invariably, they are there getting out of bed every day to make a difference to their communities. And systems and bureaucracies, and particularly political leaders, need to be saying, we're working on this collectively. I applaud the establishment under Minister Clare of the Principals Reference Group. That is a signature outcome that's been from all of the principal associations, combined with a lot of the work that we've been putting out there to work collectively in hearing the voice of principals. But any system leader needs to be clear in saying, don't ask them questions and then not respond to what they tell you. Believe them invariably. Yes, there are some areas that are open for discussion and debate, absolutely. But investing in that culture training, as our recommendation says, that builds cooperative and empathetic relationships between staff and principals will go a long way to rectifying some of the aggravation that seems to be at foot. So here's another quick piece that we had published in Educational Management, Administration and Leadership in December last year. Comes again drawn from it, and it approaches the issue about resilience. Now, this is what some of the critique has been. If you're just more resilient, then you won't have these problems. Well, what does that actually mean? And what are the relationships between resilience, the job demands, and the burnout? Well, there's no Nobel Prizes here. When we actually see that there's a positive correlation between resilience and job satisfaction, negative to burnout, negative between that and quantitative demands, positive between that and burnout. Again, the story is the same all over the place. What we came to the conclusion was that we have to address high emotional demands. We must address those, but we need to have also tailored strategies to reduce job demands. It's one thing to actually have an emotional response to it, but the sheer volume of that is what's critical as well. We also caution against what was a very big post-COVID response, which I disparagingly, and I hope I don't offend anybody too much, by saying red velvet cupcakes are not the solution to this. They might be a useful thing, but they need to be much more significant, such as structured debriefing, collegial support, role clarity. These are deeply, deeply unexciting things, but they are the things that are going to make a big difference. Our piece came out in December last year, but it picks up some work that came out from Oxford, not related to schools. A big data set, nearly 30,000 in this. What sorts of impacts of wellbeing interventions have the sort of efficacy that some of their protagonists would claim? And the result for that is depressingly sad. Without going into the data terribly much, there's a bit of a rabbit list of a whole range of strategies. And when you look at the effect size of those, that pretty much you could get about the same sort of thing without doing any of them, really. And that's really quite strange. The only strategy that is completely positive in its spread is volunteering. Volunteering, everything else has a bit of a crossfade. And resilience, well, it's completely under. When they looked at the directionality of some of these impacts, these are the things that they found. What is actually having a positive impact? These things. My manager consults me. There's good collaboration, fair promotion. Now, fair pay is a very complex one because of the number of instruments that we've got across the country. I'm consulted on change. And look at one of the biggest ones. I get to choose my break. It remains extraordinary that for nearly 500,000 employees across schools in Australia, we regulate when they can go to the toilet. It's a most remarkable thing. But these are the sorts of strategies, and they are functional working condition issues. And again, Flip concludes that off-the-shelf programs are not likely to be satisfactory. What will be more satisfactory are wellbeing interventions which seek what? Organisational change and that engage with working conditions. So we can do yoga, we can have red cupcakes, we can have a retreat. All these things are not themselves inappropriate. They just don't have the efficacy that some of their advocates would claim, and they leave people feeling perhaps tangentially, sporadically feeling better, but they actually don't solve the root cause of what the issues are that underpin workplace well-being. I was speaking earlier today to somebody who's doing some research in the impact of psychosocial workplace legislation and the role that has in developing cultures in schools. This is going to be the next layer of some of this work. Now, there's enough in that last little bit for a number of systems and policy makers to be able to get their teeth into, and then some in the brevity of the afternoon. But let's come back and conclude then with some of the issues about what we can as individuals do. The next section picks up a whole raft of diverse material, a lot of it research-based, a lot of it practice-based, and some of it the wisdom of yore. In 2003, Alan Flintham undertook a study through the National College of School Leadership on why head teachers, principals, in UK primary schools leave. And he used the metaphor of the reservoir of hope, very similar to the oxygen mask. We give out so much of ourselves that if we don't replenish the reservoir, we have nothing left to give. My own little aphorism about that is we have to care for ourselves so that we can care for those entrusted to our care. If we don't do those things, we are going to be depleted and we will not be able to sustain the type of work. We've seen over the 15 years of our data, the shift that that's had. We've seen that there are some significant structural and systemic responses that can be made, but it comes back to then a sense of self-belief, self-action, and these are some things that you can do. I'm not a person that likes to be told not what to do, so here are my positively framed 12 do's. The first one, eat well. Fresh, varied and seasonal. The food philosopher Michael Pollan has a fairly simple aphorism as well. He said, eat real food, mostly fruit and vegetables, and not too much. He also has another aphorism that says, don't let a corporation cook for you. Now, we are in busy lives, we are in busy worlds, but being able to eat well, being able to have a sense of variety that is there. And I want to challenge those school leaders that are out there to do a bit of a mental shift around how many times might you have lunch at your desk? How many times might you actually not have food to sustain you? The next one, limit alcohol. I'm going to be really, really blunt. I'm not your mum. I'm not going to tell you what that limit is. You're all big grown-up people. But I'm saying that we know demonstrably from research the significant impact that that has on sleep patterns, on well-being generally, on depression. And then the last one is exercise. Take it regularly, not seriously. And again, that came from a big program that was done in New South Wales, I want to say maybe about 15, 20 years ago. Now, when I presented some of this list, there often becomes a criticism to say that there is nothing in the rest of them, sorry, spoiler alert, there's nothing in the rest of them that says you should get more sleep. That's an easy thing to say, get more sleep. These are the three things that contribute to your ability to get more sleep. Just by telling you get more sleep and you don't change any of those three things will leave you sleepless and therefore more guilty that you're not getting sleep. You do these things, you're going to increase the likelihood of improving your sleep, and that will be beneficial for you. Now, a major meta-analysis done about the Mediterranean diet found some extraordinary things, and this is only from 5 years ago. This is such delightful language in this. The seasonal consumption of fresh and local products, biodiversity, variety of foods, especially fruits, veggies, different colours. It's always a good indicator. If everything's yellow, not so much good. Traditional culinary activities, which is a big long phrase for the word cooking. Conviviality and frugality, and that just means having friends around and not eating too much, represents the cornerstone of conserving the Mediterranean diet. Now, if your understanding of the Mediterranean diet is a bowl of carbonara and half a bottle of red, there's a little bit more work to be done on that. It's interesting that the social and frugality elements of the Mediterranean diet are seen to be two of its protective factors. Now, whatever you think about eat, pray, love, or under the Tuscan sun, or anything else you want, that is the heart and soul of the success of the Mediterranean diet. Let's push on, because some of these are, again, not particularly contentious. The explosion, again, since 2014, the rise of smartphones and streaming services mean that there is not an ability to disconnect unless we actively make strategies to do so. Unfortunately, we see too many evidences of being bad examples of the sorts of things that we put forward, but these are the types of things that have led to right to disconnect laws. I spoke to some school leaders in New South Wales after the New South Wales Department changed their right to disconnect, even before the legislation at a national level went in. And I said, how's that going after about 3 weeks? And they said, it's terrific. I get to work, and like 2 minutes to 8, nothing in my mailbox. 2 minutes past 8, 300 emails drop into my mailbox. It hasn't solved the quantum of the work. It's actually created the problem because it's compressed it. And so they've got less time to be able to deal with that. Being able to go on and to set some other agendas of constraint means positively connecting with family, friends, whatever it is that is going to give you a sense of disconnection. Years ago, there was the Sydney Morning Herald ran a campaign. There was this undertaker, and he went to parties, and the only thing he could talk about is mahogany or pine. Until, of course, he read the Sydney Morning Herald, and then he could wax lyrical and creative about a whole bunch of things. Do you have friends who would go, no, Paul's coming round for dinner tonight, and all he's going to talk about is school? Finding ways of being able to connect that are not to do with school is a really important strategy. Have regular medical checkups. Many of you are probably of the age where the government helps you out with these processes by sending you little packages every couple of years to get you on your go. But having regular medical checks, because we know the benefit of preventative medicine rather than trying to fix things up when they are broken. Do the people work when the people are there? Great wisdom from a very revered mentor of mine. So I don't have a reference for that one. But he said, the paperwork is going to be there at 7 o'clock tonight. The people, because education is fundamentally about relationships, and being able to do people work when the people are there is, again, a bit of wisdom. This is a tough one. Say no and set limits. This is particularly hard if you're an early career leader, because you kind of want to demonstrate that they didn't get the decision wrong to appoint you. And so you'll often work really, really hard. It does become, and 2 years ago when we put our report out, we actually looked at the impact of career stages, and we found that some of the adverse data is more skewed towards those who are early in their career. So as much as you can, say no, set limits. Look, I don't know what Marie Kondo means to you, but whatever it is, find it and do it. It's important to have an identity and a sense of self that's disconnected from the work. It's very easy to, in the words of John Ray, a legendary headmaster from the UK, whose memoir was called Delusions of Grandeur. It's very easy to get tricked into thinking that we are believe our own publicity. No, do something that's actually really just unconnected, and it's going to bring you something that's life-affirming. It's going to bring you joy. As I saw in that Oxford research, do some service to the community, do some service to other people. And some of you will already be doing a lot of work, and you'll go, Paul, I'm already doing some stuff. Yeah, but if it's part of your job, it's a different aspect. So doing something that is not necessarily going to advance your career or polish your career profile. Go somewhere each term or break. Just get away. If it's just an overnight one, go home a different way. I love water. I live by the coast, and even when I was a principal, between the school and my house, I didn't have to go past the water, but some days they were just those days, and I drove past it anyway because it gave me a sense of joy. It gave me a sense of relief. Now, that's not a policy coming out from head office. These are disciplines that I need to do myself. And the last one is be grateful. The work of Martin Seligman, he uses the little tool, hunt the good stuff. What's happened today that you found really good? What can you do tomorrow to get more of it? And what could you do to help others get the same? It helps build this attitude of thankfulness, of gratitude, because yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that might not be great. But gee, there's also some stuff that is really, really great. And while those big macro things might not easily be able to shift, until they do some of these things, because you can look after yourself at that. I'm going to throw open to some questions through you, Carolyn, and thanks for the opportunity again to be able to share some of that. Love to welcome any of you to come back and let me see some of those beautiful visages that are out there underneath those names. Over to you, Carolyn.
That was so great. I can't believe how much you were able to share with us in such a short amount of time. So thank you. That was incredibly powerful. And just while we're waiting for people to pop any questions into the Q&A, or you're welcome to raise your hand if you'd like, if you've got a question or a comment you'd like to pose. Just while we're waiting, I just thought we'd offer a moment of reflection. Just if we all just take a moment to consider, what does this research mean for you in your role? What resonated? And perhaps more importantly, is there anything that you heard that you might apply or do differently? Or what conversations might you take back to your teams as a result of what you've heard today? These are the kinds of questions that I think Paul's really encouraged us to sit with, not even just as individuals, but as teams.
Carolyn, can I add to that?
Please.
When I work with particularly principals and aspiring principals, I do a lot of work in the aspiring principal space as well. Those 12 do's, they're not exclusive. I mean, there's a lot of good research under, kind of 2/3 of them, but a lot of them is also that wisdom of the profession. And sometimes it's a really good thing to go, oh, out of the, I'm doing well on that. No, not quite doing quite so well on that. And it can form like an audit tool, just as a good reminder to say, hey, yeah, look, I need to keep working on some of this.
Look, I'm not going to lie. I felt a little bit shamed when you started talking about the fact that I don't eat well. I drink way too much alcohol, and I'm currently not exercising at the moment. And just to add to that trifecta, I think I fell asleep scrolling on my phone last night. So.
And Carolyn, I'm not your therapist, but thank you. That's very kind. Belinda, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, hi, thanks for that. And I could only join you for the second part, so I only got the tail end of some of the research you were presenting. So I'd be really interested to see more of it. But the one slide there that you had, organisational change that engages working conditions, as being the big factor rather than some of those sort of older approaches to supporting staff as well as our principals. And I was just wondering, is there any sort of more details in regard to some of those organisational change, factors, I guess, that principals were particularly, asking for?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a really big literature around, the autonomy, and that's a how long's a piece of string sort of conversation. There's a lot of work that's been done through the lens of the job demands resources model. And again, a number of papers that are sort of saying that the work is just beyond capable of being able to be done. Going right back into about 2007, 2008, Helen Cannon, who's working in the Catholic sector, she did a piece on co-principalship And there have been some jurisdictions that have been saying co-principalship is a legitimate model. Why aren't we looking at more of that? There are a number of them that have been sort of talking about, compressed hours. But again, compressed hours, like the email issue, is if you don't actually deal with the quantum of the work itself, then simply compressing that is going to be difficult. And it's very different across different jurisdictions, Belinda. You'll see across a number of the poor old Victorian department's going through a real caning at the moment over exactly these types of issues. And you look at what's happened this week, and one of the things that they're saying is this isn't about money, which, it's always going to be about money. No one's going to object to being paid more. But it's true that they're saying it's not just about the money, it's about some of these working conditions. Now, we've got to keep in mind as well, and this is where some of the other work that I do from this project comes out, that we see, unfortunately, some of the emotional pressures come from families and caregivers, parents and caregivers, who just are belligerent towards school leaders in ways that they would never treat anybody in any other workplace. Now, that's a not unreasonable request to be able to be in a safe environment where you can get on and do your work. We had a Senate inquiry a few years back on disruption in schools. You've got vast contestation around jurisdictions about direct or explicit instruction as a mandate or a policy or a recommendation, and all these sorts of things are just the milieu in which principals say, can we just be part of this conversation? It's why that principals reference group that, and I want to again applaud particularly the advocacy of Andy Myson, who's been very central in a lot of that discussion with Minister Clare. To have those direct discussions is a very useful beginning point. But until they actually get put into an effective change of policy, they're cathartic without necessarily changing any outcomes.
Yes, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Paul, Tobias has made a really interesting comment in the Q&A. I work with a lot of younger leaders and teachers. The notion of vocation is endangered. And I know Natalie Thackwell in the audience now is doing some research around career aspirations of early career teachers. And we're finding that there is a cultural shift in some of our younger staff coming through who have very clear boundaries and do tend to prioritise and protect their workspace. So is there any thoughts or comments in regards to Tobias's discussion post there?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Tobias. It's a great comment. It's actually a word that also has a really dangerous underside because it can be a mechanism of abuse. And it can be that, oh, well, of course you would do this because it's your vocation. And unfortunately, I'd have to say that there are some sectors and groups that are kind of worse on that than others. The overwhelming rising evidence is also from principals. I was dealing with a group of principals a couple of weeks back, and a consistent message where they're struggling to be able to give teachers, ongoing work. And the teacher shortage is actually a little bit different when you say, hey, Carolyn, I'd love to give you a 12-month job. You take that, and at the end of it, you've done such a great job. We'd like to give you a continuing job. And you go, yeah, no, look, I think I'm going to go and work in Cairns. And the number of principals who are saying it's exacerbating that teacher supply issue, not because there's not the teachers there, but because a number of these teachers will say, hey, life is to be lived, and I want to go off, and I want to go here, I want to go and live in England for a little bit, I want to go and travel, and I'll come back and I'll get whatever. I only want to work 3 days a week. Now, of course, they are a subset of other groups as well. So it's complex across the landscape, but we certainly are hearing a frustration from principals saying that it's a different mindset amongst a number of younger teachers. One spoke to me only, what's today? It was late last week. And they said, I find it hard to be able to hear in the voice of some of my young teachers any notion of aspiration to get along in the profession. It's not, I don't have a sense of, well, I'll do this for a bit and then I want to become a, whatever. It's probably, I think, reflective, this is a personal view. I think, again, AITSL had a very deep breath when they realised after all of the energy that went into Holt accreditation, people didn't want to take it up because they kind of went, why do I want to do that amount of work for not much difference? You know, I think there is a different savviness about that from a number of contemporary leaders. And I think, Tobias, actually going to your point, there are fewer people who are, if I can put it mildly, sort of looking towards senior leadership and say, I want me some of that. And they're saying that cautiously because they look at this data and they look at the impact that it's taking, the toll that it's taking on their current leader, and they're going, yeah, I'm not quite sure that I want to do that. And there are plenty of leaders that you could probably give them another $50,000 and they'd say, I'm still not going to come and do it. It's just too much of a human cost for me to make.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I'll just see if there's anyone else that raises their hand or pop in the Q&A, but if not, Paul, I was actually really interested in the digital space that's changed so much since 2011 and 2025. And I'm just wondering, and I've popped it in there, when you compare the challenges reported since 2011 with those reported today, has there been an impact due to the rise of social media? Has that changed some of the nature of the conflict that school leaders are experiencing? Is there a rise in cyberbullying or any of those sorts of things? Are they playing out in some of the data?
Yeah, certainly it is. And look, I didn't include it because some of that gets a bit of a look out in the media work that I do. But yes, there is. And unfortunately, a lot of it tends to be parents to school leaders. We ask participants, what type of offensive behaviours are you subjected to, from whom, and what sort of frequency? And so that gives us a good pattern of being able to see what's changed there. And we do see that one of the biggest areas has been, unfortunately, a rise of parents who will be quite forthright. Look, and that's a societal issue, Carolyn. You know, schools are great resources that we as a community need, we as a nation need, right? But they also can't solve all sorts of problems that are not of their creating. If you look back at the other thing that's happened over those 15 years, that compression is a whole lot of things. Oh, actually, we've got a whole lot of really challenging societal behaviours. We need kids to be able to swim properly. We need kids to be able to drive properly. We need kids to be able to have sex properly. We need kids to be able to do all sorts of things like that. The school will do that. Well, the school can do that, but don't then complain that literacy and numeracy results are suffering because there's been no commensurate increase of resourcing to be able to. We've still got this pretty much the same school hours and pretty much the same school calendar, and yet we've tried to squeeze more and more into that same limited period of time. And fundamentally, you just can't continue to expand outcomes whilst you actually haven't, and that's why it goes to some of those organisational elements as well.
No, that's so interesting, and thank you. Now, I'm very mindful we are just about out of time, but before we close, I would really like to offer some thanks. Firstly to you, Paul, but to your entire research team that's sitting behind this work as well. Thank you, Paul, for your time today, but also your willingness to share and collaborate with us here so generously in Queensland. We know that the issues explored in this research are not unique to one state or territory. This is a national issue, and we are deeply appreciative of the work that you and your team are doing and your commitment to bringing it here to us for this conversation. Thank you also to our audience. I really hope this session today was informative and it's given you something to carry forward. And I really do encourage you to take a moment now, or perhaps in the coming days, to consider what next? What does this research, or maybe this reservoir of hope, mean for you in your role? How might it inform the way you support or advocate for or work alongside school leaders? And finally, thank you to the Griffith Institute for Educational Research for their ongoing support of the Educational Leadership Futures and for making events like this possible. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Associate Professor Paul Kidson. Please do stay in touch and we'll share the recording and PowerPoint tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.